Greg, your colleague Paul Kelly has written a great column today looking at the last week's budget and highlighting this immense shift, as he sees it, in the coalition's approach to economics since the coalition first elected in 2013. He wrote that the budget is more than fiscal pragmatism. It's a new departure in the Liberal social project that creates risks with fiscal sustainability. Now, all this talk about a social project is a bit like Labor spending budgets. There's a parallel there. What does this mean? Is the Howard Abbott budget repair legacy junked, or is Josh Frydenberg wanting us to believe you can do both?
No, Peter, it's great to be with you. I think my colleague, of course, was right on the money, Paul Kelly, but I think it does mean the legacy is junked, basically, your first alternative. I have a column in tomorrow's paper just charting what has happened across Western politics. The centre-right parties have become the parties of manual workers and non-university graduates. If university graduates only had their votes counted at the last British election, Jeremy Corbyn would be Prime Minister today, which is the greatest argument ever advanced against university education, I must say. But one consequence of that political identity switch is that centre-right parties around the world, certainly in the United States, Britain and Australia, have now become structural big spending parties. Now, one of the arguments I make in my column tomorrow is that means there is no one left of consequence in Western politics who argues for normal conservative fiscal responsibility. I mean, it is a key conservative insight that you can't spend money that you don't have. Over the long term, you just end up in more and more debt. Now, it's all complicated by COVID because there's always a case for emergency expenditure. But if you look at, 2/3 of that $100 billion in new money in the budget was welfare. And once you start giving people welfare, it's very hard to take it away from them. Not one new dollar for a new defence capability. We're still going to spend billions of dollars on tanks, which we have no military use for whatsoever. So all the government's talk about our security dire straits seems to be reflected in no action. And instead, we're giving away money at a rate never before seen in our history. I think that is not just a COVID emergency response, that's a structural change in politics.
Well, I think it's a crisis, Greg. If you're taking the Conservative argument about fiscal repair and economic prudence out of one of the two major parties, Labor never had it, I'd argue, then I don't know how we pay our way. I don't know where these revenues are coming to fund the NDIS and this increased and perpetual welfare burden.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Peter. Again, I go into this in my column tomorrow. As well as spending vastly more than we can afford, all the ways that we earn a living are currently under threat. So there's a massive green attack on our coal exports and our agricultural exports. China is racing to find an alternative to our iron ore. The only service industries we make any money out of are education and tourism, and they're suspended because of COVID. The only way you can pay down debt is through economic growth. Economic growth for Australia comes only through productivity increases or immigration. There's no sign of productivity increases, and immigration is suspended. So this doesn't add up. You can live on your credit card for some time, which is what we've decided to do, but there's no prospect in sight of ever paying this off, and no one anymore is making the argument. I think it was a great loss for the government when Matthias Cormann left the government, because he was one voice of fiscal responsibility, and that's gone now.
I 100% agree. And it was interesting, there was some material out from Chris Richardson, the economist that people will be aware of. In the hockey budget, he tried to save $38 billion over 4 years, and the political pressure was such that the budget struggled in the Senate, and it was obviously very, very tough on the government. But to get back to a surplus position, or at least a balanced position, out of these deficit budgets, we've got them there for a decade, we're talking about having to find $50 billion per annum. Not over 4 years, $50 billion. Now, if we couldn't stomach, as a country, the politics of trying to find $38 billion over 4 years, Try finding $50 billion every single year just to get back to the position where we are only spending what we're earning. We're not borrowing more to spend more.
Absolutely. That would be just to remove our primary deficit. But to pay all the debt off, you'd have to do much better than
Craig.
that. It seems to me...
Correct. That doesn't even touch the size of $1 trillion debt.
Yeah, our political culture, in my view, is now labouring under two utterly destructive delusions. One is that our prosperity is guaranteed forever, and the other is that our security is guaranteed forever. We are living in a very dangerous country. It's called unreality.
Look, you've said it very eloquently. Someone who wasn't eloquent today, Foreign Affairs spokeswoman for Labor Penny Wong, extraordinary broadside attacking Scott Morrison, basically accusing him of playing politics, domestic political gain coming out of this China-Australia debate. Fair or not fair?
Well, Peter, I might surprise you a little bit here. I don't really criticise Penny over this statement. Oppositions criticise governments. That's what they do. What I thought was very interesting about Penny Wong's statement is that she sort of used her criticism of Scott Morrison to make very sustained, deep criticisms of Beijing's policy. She committed Labor to being very strong on the South China Sea, on 5G, on Huawei, on Xinjiang, on human rights, on the law of the sea, on freedom of navigation. And she kind of gave herself cover for doing this by criticising the government. She has half a point with the government in the sense that the government keeps telling us we're facing a security crisis, but everything it's doing in defence doesn't yield us any new capabilities until the mid-2030s. So if there really is a crisis, why aren't they doing more? Why didn't we see some evidence of this in the budget? So I think she has half a point there. I think her other criticisms of Morrison are exaggerated, but I think that's by the by. I think the long-term significance of her speech is that it commits Labor to the same position as the government on the substance of the issues, while naturally, it does what opposition... what did Churchill say? The purpose of an opposition is to oppose everything, propose nothing, and turn the government out.
Hey, just a quick one. I haven't got much time, but I'm just interested in your assessment of Biden in and around everything that's going on in Israel.
Well, I think we have this crisis in Gaza because of Biden. Biden reversed all the good incentives that Trump set up. Trump encouraged the Gulf Arab nations to cooperate with Israel, and he got 4 peace accords out of it. He told the Palestinians that their rejectionism and violence and terrorism would get them nothing, and they were flummoxed and nonplussed by this, and they realised there was no incentive to terrorism and the sort of attacks we've just seen. And most of all, he put Iran under tremendous pressure. Iran is the hidden hand in these Hamas attacks on Israel. Iran is empowered by Biden. I think Biden has been strong on China, where he's got good results, and desperately weak on the Middle East. And his support of Israel is okay, but it's much more qualified than Trump's was, and that incentivises Israel's enemies to try to embarrass it in multilateral organisations by forcing it to respond to these unprovoked missile attacks.
We will watch it. It's not going to go away soon.